member of the Subcommittee on Crime, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to be able to welcome the witnesses here and listen to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and really find no reason for us to be here today because none of us should be in disagreement of empowering women and choosing the basis of the empowerment that they would utilize to be safe. I think it is important for women to be empowered. We need to respect the individual rights while also addressing the urgent need for responsible regulation, a concept that is very clear prior to the politicization of the Supreme Court of the United States. We can do both. For obvious reasons, I've been a strong proponent of women's empowerment. And if there are women who feel empowered by responsible, safe firearm ownership, that is certainly their prerogative, and I respect their decision. On the other hand, women who have a different perspective should also be safe with the kinds of gun laws that will provide them safety, common sense gun laws. And certainly in a domestic violence situation, their abusers should not have a gun to be able to use against them. I can never talk about this issue without mentioning Sergeant Preston in Houston, Texas, who enforces in his life, he is now deceased, that the domestic violence calls are some of the most dangerous calls that are ever made. And he lost his life protecting a mother and son. They lived, but he died answering a domestic violence call. And I always want to pay tribute to Sergeant Preston. I also want to put into the record, Mr. Chairman, before amicus brief led by the House Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, signed by 151 representatives and 18 senators, filed in U.S. versus Rabini, and just take one quote that I think is important. The only difference between a battered woman and a dead woman is the presence of a gun. So we know that.
Objection.
I thank you. We know that we have to be safe when we talk about gun use. And let me put into the record as well some statistics that are important as I begin to ask my questions. Just having access to a firearm makes an abuser 5 times more likely to take their partner's life. Over the last decade, gun homicides by intimate partners jumped 58%, and the pandemic was an especially lethal period for abuse victims. Gun homicides involving intimate partners rose a stunning 25% in 2020, compared with the previous year to the highest level in almost 3 decades. And in that year, women accounted for more than 2/3 of the victims shot and killed by intimate partners. In 2021, researchers reported that more than 2/3 of recent mass shootings were involved with perpetrators who killed partners or relatives or had a history of domestic abuse. So we have to find a balance here. And so my first question I want to ask all of you is gun storage a good common ground that we all can support, storing one's guns? Ms. Solomon?
I believe we all can agree that guns should be stored when not in use.
Yep. Ms. Wattrell?
But I also believe, I agree with Ms. Solomon, but I also believe they have to be accessible. If I am going to have a firearm in my home.
But you believe that storage is good. Thank you. Ms. Glenn?
Absolutely.
And Ms. Alcatraz? We know they have to be accessible, but you have children, so do you believe in good storage structure?
Storage is only part of the education and training that we would do for
But
our
it is
families.
included in it. I appreciate your response. Let me also indicate that I have a letter from the Jewish Women International I'd like to ask submitted into the record.
Without objection.
Okay, and I'd like to also acknowledge the Moms Demand Action for your leadership. And I think what I'd like to conclude on is I believe in empowering women. I believe any hearing that would suggest that any difference between protecting domestic violence victims is untoward and incorrect. I do want to leave a topic that is somewhat related about empowering women, and I have paid tribute to her and acknowledged her, and that is the horrific reproductive rights legislation that we have in Texas that has allowed an innocent mother of 31 years old to actually flee our state to be able to save her life and to be able to have additional children, and that is Kate Cox. So when we talk about empowering women, We need to talk about all issues. Ms. Glenn, I'm very pleased to see your leadership on these issues, but I want to make sure that your leadership is not diminished. You want to train women, but you want to make sure that people know that a gun can be very detrimental. And I guess as I close, so can detrimental reproductive denial that would allow a young woman or force her to flee and to prosecute innocent medical providers who are simply trying to save lives. We should not prosecute anyone for trying to save lives. With that, I yield back.
Nice to see you again. Thank you for being here. Your current budget, by my calculations, is $48.3 billion. Is that right?
The budget request is for $37.8 billion, the FY25 budget, and that would constitute a 3.5% increase over.
But with mandatory spending, your budget's 48.3. Is that right?
I don't have the number for including mandatory, but I'll certainly be able to get back to you for that.
Well, let's take out mandatory.
Yeah.
Your discretionary budget right now is $37.8 billion.
The FY25 request is for 37.8.
That's not what I'm asking.
I'm sorry?
What's your current budget?
Well, it's 3.5% less than that, so I can take out my calculator and do the math, but I don't have it in front of me.
All right, well, let me put it another way. You're asking for an extra $467 million, is that right?
In the increased amount of money that we're asking for, that's approximately right, yes.
Okay. To your knowledge, in the past, let's say 40 years, has the Department of Justice ever come before Congress and said, we don't need any more? We're going to make it with what we've got in light of the fiscal circumstances in the country?
I normally wouldn't want to speculate, but in this case, I can't imagine that the Department of Justice, facing increasing threats every year, violent crime, threats to our national security, drug trafficking threats,
Is that a no?
I don't know the answer, but I think it would be surprising if the department ever asked for less money. I think that
Okay.
would be not responsible.
You talked in a little bit in your testimony, General, about guns, and you've been very outspoken about the need for more gun control. With respect, and if you don't mind me asking, do you own a gun?
I don't.
Okay. Have you ever fired a gun?
Many times.
Okay. Do you have 24-hour security?
I do.
Okay. Let me ask you about.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For years, the Democrats told us we're not coming for your guns. Oh, yes, they are. Let's be clear. The Second Amendment is as clear as possible, and that's their beef. The Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But they don't care. In fact, the sponsor of this legislation said so in committee. He said, quote, "Spare me the BS about constitutional rights." They don't care about that fundamental liberty law-abiding citizens in this country enjoy. And they're coming for your firearms. 6 weeks ago, it was the red flag law. You know, where someone who doesn't like you can report you to law enforcement or to a judge. There's a hearing that you can't be at, your counsel can't be present, you haven't been charged with the crime, but they can take your firearm. They can take your property, they can take away your Second Amendment liberties, and then you have to petition for a subsequent hearing to get that right back, and you have done nothing wrong and have not been charged with the crime. Then House Democrats passed the unconstitutional legislation that said 18 to 20-year-olds can't purchase a firearm. They can fight for our country, but they can't purchase a firearm. And today they're coming for your guns. 24 million of them. That's right, 24 million AR-style rifles are in the hands of law-abiding Americans today as we speak, and those individuals will not be able to sell or transfer that property. In the Heller case, the Supreme Court made clear that the Second Amendment protects firearms in common use at the time. During the markup, Representative Bishop asked the chairman, quote, is it the point of the bill to ban weapons that are in common use in the United States today? And the chairman said, the problem is that they are in common use. Yes, so this is the goal, and this is why it's unconstitutional. It couldn't be any clearer. Democrats don't care what the Constitution says. Fortunately, courts are correctly applying the Constitution. Last week, a federal district court judge in Colorado, who was appointed by President Obama, issued a temporary restraining order against the town of Superior, Colorado, to prevent it from implementing an assault weapon ban. The judge wrote, plaintiffs have stated that semi-automatic weapons, as well as magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, are commonly used by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes, and therefore cannot be banned. And guess what this bill will do? It won't make communities safer. Won't make them safer at all. In fact, in the Heller case, the Supreme Court said, Second Amendment protects firearms in common use at the time, and also said this, quote, for lawful purposes like self-defense. 3 weeks ago, July 7th, 2022, a Florida homeowner used his AR-style rifle when individuals forcibly entered his home. After the homeowner opened fire, the individuals immediately fled. When asked if the homeowner would face charges, the Escambia County Sheriff Chip Simmons said, quote, absolutely not. The homeowner is protecting himself, and in Florida, you can do that. You can protect yourself. Democrats tried this ban before. It didn't work. It won't work now. And you know what it will do? It'll make communities, I think, less safe. What will make communities safer, though, is if Democrats stop defunding the police, stop cashless bail, start prosecuting criminals. They're taking away firearms used for self-defense by law-abiding Americans. This bill is wrong. It will make communities, I think, less safe, and it's unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves.
Mr. Goldman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Beer, I want to go back to a little bit about what my colleague from Texas was talking about in terms of the data. Obviously, it's self-evident that if there are more people in the country and a specific percentage of people commit crimes, there's going to be more crime, right?
Yes, the absolute number will increase if the total population is larger.
Okay. But you and the Cato Institute have done some work on this, and what have you, in terms of comparing the data that is available, which is limited, of the number of non-American citizens who commit crime versus those who are citizens of the United States? And just to summarize again what you have found.
Well, the U.S. Census Bureau data, which goes through 2022, shows that non-Americans or immigrants are 68% less likely to have committed a crime that put them in prison at that time. And if you look at it, break it down by legal status, you can say that 75% less likely for legal immigrants and about 50% less likely for illegal immigrants. And we keep hearing about why this is such a big surprise. It's not a surprise if you look at the demographic characteristics of immigrants. They're more likely to work, more likely to marry, particularly if you look at male immigrants. Men commit the vast majority of crimes in this country. Male immigrants work at a rate almost double when you control for education level than similarly educated Americans.
Right, and there are other studies that have been done. The Marshall Project and the New York Times found that between 2007 and 2016, there was no link between undocumented immigrants and a rise in violent or property crime in those communities. Sheriff Wayburn was talking about in Dallas, crime is down. Crime in New York City is down also, and we've had a significant influx of newly arrived migrants. So yes, of course, there will be more crime as there are more people. But if the argument is that our country is proportionately or disproportionately more dangerous and insecure and unsafe because of the influx of migrants, the statistics just simply don't bear that out. Is that right, Mr. Beer?
That's right. No one's saying we should continue illegal immigration. The question is Should we allow people to come legally to this country or not? That's the whole question. It's already illegal to come here illegally. So the question is, should they be allowed to stay, have a path to legal status, have a path to come in legally? And we keep hearing that there's this big threat. No, if the crime rate goes down, that means your likelihood of being a victim of a crime goes down, and that's a good thing.
Well, let's focus on something that my Republicans don't like to talk about, which is the impact of guns on both the fentanyl trade and the influx of migrants. Am I correct, Mr. Beer, that the cartels broadly rule the border in terms of the fentanyl trade as well as a lot of the migration? Is that accurate?
Absolutely. They charge a fee to cross the border illegally. They control the traffic. They force people to cross where they want them to cross. It is
And
controlled by
Sheriff Wayburn, do you agree?
Absolutely.
And Sheriff Wayburn, do you agree that the cartels are able to control the fentanyl trade and the border because they possess weapons, guns, that help give them the power and authority?
I haven't inventoried their weapons, of course, but they are a very powerful outlaw organization, and they do have tools.
Sheriff Wayburn, would you be surprised to hear that over 500,000 guns are trafficked annually from the United States to Mexico?
None of those figures would surprise me.
In fact, there's only one gun store in Mexico. It is almost impossible to get a gun in Mexico. And so the cartels, who you've acknowledged, Sheriff Wayburn, and I'm sure, Mr. Cuccinelli, I think you've acknowledged that to me in the past, the cartels rule with guns, but they rule with American-made guns. And yet we are doing nothing to try to stop the trade, try to stop the export of American-manufactured guns to the cartels, which give them the power to run the fentanyl trade and to wreak havoc at the border. And that is why I introduced a bill, the Disarming Cartels Act. I urge my Republican colleagues who do not discuss guns once in their seminal border security package to join us in trying to actually solve the problem. And to solve the problem, you need to stop the export of American-made guns to the drug cartels so that will limit and eliminate their power. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yield to a member on the Democratic side that served in a combat area designated zone and deployment of our country. Anybody in the Democratic side?
Mr. Stubbe, what's the purpose of the question? My father, no, let me finish. Let me finish.
Because I'm going to make a point and you're taking my time. So I will yield to any member who
because
deployed.
I'm offended at your suggestion that somehow if we've not served in a combat zone that we don't care about protecting the lives of our constituents.
Has nothing to do about how you
to me.
And for our family members who have lost blood, they should be respected.
Reclaiming my time. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like 40 seconds
I've seen
back on
my
the clock.
constituents die in battle.
It's Mr. Stubbe's time. Gentleman is recognized.
And I will ask for 40 additional seconds that I was taken. Okay, so I served in Operation Iraqi Freedom. I served in the Army, and there's a lot of talk in Washington about weapons of war. And my purpose of yielding to one of my colleagues who may have served was to ask them a specific question of what type of firearm were you issued when you were deployed? And the answer to that question is a true what would be defined as a weapon actually used in war, has a selector switch on it for fully automatic, 3-round burst, and semi-automatic. So when I deployed in 2006 in Operation Iraqi Freedom, we were issued M4s in the United States Army. Those M4s had a selector switch on them. Those selector switch allow you to have fully automatic, 3-round burst, or semi-automatic. Those firearms are not allowed for purchase in the United States today. So this cascading of weapons of war, what I was issued, and again, I would ask any person that served in a deployed environment, you are issued weapons that allow for fully automatic and 3-round burst. That is not available for purchase in the United States, and that is not what the Democrats are attempting to ban today because that's already banned. What we're talking about is a semi-automatic rifle that only is used in a semi-automatic form. So behind me is a typical AR platform weapon. and you can't see it because it's on this side, not the other side, that has a selector switch on it. That selector switch is only for fire or not fire, safe or not safe, and that is for a semi-matic operation of the weapon, which means every time I depress the trigger, a round comes out of the firearm. All right, next slide, and just move it over. This is the most popular handgun in the United States that was purchased is a Glock 19. It functions in exactly the same way as this rifle. It's a semi-automatic, just like that's a semi-automatic. The rifles not available for purchase don't have a selector switch for 3-round bursts or fully auto. This is a semi-automatic handgun. As quick as I depress the trigger of this Glock 19, a round comes out of the chamber. The functionality between that weapon and this weapon are exactly identical. There is no difference. So you're banning a class of weapons that you don't like the look of, not because of functionality, not because of how fast a round comes out of the weapon, just because you don't like the way that they look, because they function exactly the same. Now move this one over one. So now this is a Glock 19. Glock 19 comes with a 15-round magazine, which under this bill is legal, although it's interesting that a couple weeks ago you banned 10-round magazines and then you changed it to a 15-round magazine. It's interesting to understand the thought process there, but that is for another time. This is a 6-hour P320, which some of you probably saw in one of the hearings on the magazine bans. I showed my P320. This comes with a 20-round magazine. So under this bill, because it has a 15-round magazine ban, this gun would be banned because you wouldn't be able to use it. Again, it functions exactly the same as that gun. It functions exactly the same. As fast as you depress the trigger is as fast as a round comes out. So now the next one. So that gun would be banned. That would be okay because you can put a 15-round magazine in it. This is a lever action. Under this bill, lever actions apparently are okay, but semi-automatic AR platform rifles are not okay. So we're going to discriminate against the type of firearms that we're going to use, despite the fact that the functionality is the same. The only difference here is after you depress the trigger and a round comes out, you have to reload using the lever action, which saves you maybe half of a second. The next one, which is also legal, is a tubular. This is a tubular 22, which, again, and Mr. Massey did a good job of highlighting how ridiculous the calibers of the bullets are. The Democratic majority is discriminating against some of the most popular weapons in the United States simply because they don't like the way they look, not because of the way they function. And there are so many Americans that are confused when they see the semi-automatic rifle that the Democrats want to ban as being fully automatic. It's not. You can't purchase that. It's illegal. It is not a weapon of war. A weapon of war has a fully automatic switch or a 3-round burst. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.